You're listening to Empire by Design, episode 70.
Hey, I'm Katie White, coach, consultant, transformation facilitator, action taker, empire builder, and this is Empire by Design. In this show, we're building empires, we're sharing stories, and we're getting up close and personal on the strategies that make an empire in today's online world. Get all the show notes, past episodes and more at katiewyatt.me. For now, settle in for the ride. Welcome back to our Should I Start a Podcast Summer Series. If you're starting here, please pause and go back to part 1, episode number 68, and begin at the beginning. Why? In this series, we are answering the question, should I start a podcast? And we're doing that by sharing the real journey of entrepreneur Anna Chisholm, host of the Big Impact podcast. Anna did my podcasting course, PodWell, and we began recording this series right at the start of her journey. So you will hear the challenges, inspirations, questions, and highlights of a real, relatable entrepreneur as she goes through the program and creates a podcast that is going to grow her audience and brand for the very first time. So let's get into the next installment of Should I Start a Podcast with Anna Chisholm. This summer series is brought to you by PodWell, the course that helps entrepreneurs like you gain more attention, more audience, authority, and advocates with a podcast. You can read all about it and sign up at www.podcastempires.com/join PodWell. Welcome back to the podcast, Anna. How are you going?
Hey, I'm going really well. How are you?
I'm good. So last time we spoke, you'd come up with your concept for your podcast and you were getting all your bits and pieces together. Tell me what's happened since.
Ooh, lots has happened since. So I've done my first interview, which was awesome.
And was that with was it one of your real family interviews or was it something different?
No, so this was with a girl who I've actually known for quite a while, as it happens, but she has a business, Little People Nutrition, so she's in the health and wellness space, and there's someone who I've followed for quite a while, not just personally because we're friends, but also her business. She's very much kind of in that space where I am with mums and teaching mums, and so we've got similar target markets. And she just always seems a few steps ahead of me on her kind of journey. So she's someone who really inspires me. So it was awesome to actually have the opportunity with her, sit down and have a really good conversation. So yes, it went really well for my first interview.
Beautiful. And so did you do it over Skype?
I did, yeah. And I think, I was just going to say, I think the majority of my interviews will be that way. It's so easy. And I think with the sorts of people I'll be interviewing, most of them have their own business and they've got so much going on. It just seems to fit in better. I also live in a part of Sydney that's a little bit, out of the centre. So I can't foresee myself having that many opportunities to sit down in person with people, but we'll see.
And it's good to have that up your sleeve if you're going to an event or something, to feel confident doing it face to face. But I agree.
Yeah.
Skype's so easy and it's, it makes the process a lot simpler than if you're giving up half your day traveling somewhere, meeting with somebody, setting up the tech and then hoping that it all works.
Exactly. Yep, I totally agree.
And so tell me what that experience of your first interview felt like. Like, I think it's smart that you chose somebody that you already have a connection with, so you kind of lower the nervousness rate. But what did it feel like?
Yeah, that's very true. Look, isn't it always like the thought of things are more scary than the actual things? So as soon as we started, it was absolutely fine. And I'm quite comfortable. I think one of my strengths is probably actually connecting with people and talking one-on-one with people. I get quite energized by that. I find conversation very, very easy. So I was never really nervous about that part. I think my nerves lay more around, the tech side of things and the things you can't control. Is the other person going to be on their game, or is their tech going to work, or, all those things that aren't part of our control. But the actual conversation went really well, and I'm really comfortable with that side of it, which is good, and good to kind of show myself that confidence comes from my skills in that area, I guess. So I'm really looking forward to more of the actual interviews.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think, it's good to start with someone that you know reasonably well. Like, you don't go straight in for the person that you feel like is the top of the industry or whatever that you're in. And it's totally energizing experience. And I think I was the same. I'm trying to remember now, but it was the worries about the tech and the microphone and using, all these new technologies that were kind of the most disconcerting thing. But then you do it once and it works, and you're like, this is not so bad.
Yeah. And I think on that point, and what I said about, being energized, and I love that you agree, because I feel like up until now, I'm still in, I guess, startup phase. It's the first year of my business. And for someone who's such an extrovert like me, I've built this business largely in isolation, which is just, it doesn't seem to connect with my values that much. So I think I've taken a lot of time over the past couple of months to really see what I enjoy and what energizes me and keeps me motivated in my business, because I think that's something as, small business owners or solo entrepreneurs, whatever you want to call us, is that you need to kind of create a business that's going to be sustainable for you. And if you're an extrovert like me and you've created this business where you only speak to people like maybe one time in the day, one or two clients in the day, I figured out that that's not going to be a sustainable business model for me. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, for the other people who are considering doing a podcast and really like that connecting with other people and networking and get energized by and inspired by other people, then absolutely this has been the best move for me, because I actually get to include in my day talking to other inspiring people and then getting ideas off them and motivation. And it's just, when I started this, I never pictured that would be such a positive experience. But it really, even having only done one interview, I could already see that this is going to be something that adds such value to not just my business, but also personally to me in the business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that is so pretty much why I started, because I'm someone that I would go to events and see amazing people talk, but I've never been someone that could run up to them at the end of their talk and say, "Oh, you're awesome, and this is what I want to talk to you about." And some people are like that, and I admire those people, but there's too much of a little introvert inside that means I'm not like that. So for me, the podcast was my excuse to have awesome conversations with awesome people. It's the same thing. It's so simple, but it's true.
Isn't it? I really love it. So
awesome.
I'm enjoying that.
And so do you have more interviews booked in?
I do. I've got 2 more this week and another couple who have said yes. I just need to kind of book in dates. Oh, and then a few of the real family interviews as well, which is really exciting. And I'm really looking forward to doing those interviews. And I guess that's going to be something which evolves over time, what listeners find most valuable, or how best to, I guess, structure those kind of real life family ones. So I mean, what's your advice in terms of actually getting feedback from listeners about what they want? Like, how have you approached that?
Well, and that's a really good question. I found early on that I would ask for feedback in the podcast, and I think the asking is really important. And then I would find that wasn't, it wasn't coming through, or I wasn't getting, even if it's feedback like, will you leave me a review, or will you send me an email and tell me what you think of X? Because I didn't have a Facebook group right at the beginning of my podcasting journey, although that's probably where I would have sent them if I did. And I know you have a Facebook group, so I'd be using that. But I also found that I almost needed to show people what that might look like. So somebody had sent me an email, and when I was saying on a podcast, would you leave me a review? I then read out the email as if that was a review, almost as a way to say, this is the type of thing I mean. And that made it really clear for people of, oh, okay, because sometimes they don't know what you're asking them for. So I find that using examples, so even if if your husband said to you, great job, Anna, you can say, we've had some listener feedback and this is what it said. Even being that's a really simplistic example, but taking anything and using that as an example of what feedback might look like is a good way to sort of help your listeners kind of go, oh, okay, so I know what she's asking me for and I can totally do that. Because you have a Facebook group, and it's a similar audience, right? So would you be encouraging your listeners to come and join Mumfolk?
Yeah, I think so. It's I don't know how. It's really tricky to know who is going to be listening to this. And I know that sounds weird because I should know my target market, but it's going to be, it's not, I don't think it's just going to be mums listening. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. I guess I need to wait and see. That's a tricky one, and one I don't know yet, because I also have this super smoothie challenge group, which I really want to grow and develop that community as, that one simple thing you can do to get started with your health. And I guess the podcast, it talks about people who are having a big impact, and people who have had a big impact on me and the world in terms of health. But it's also, and you'll see the last question I ask listeners is, from their perspective, what's one thing that people can start to do right now to better their own health? So in that sense, the smoothie group might be more appropriate than the Mumfolk group. I'm not sure. I need to kind of play with that a bit.
That makes total sense to me, and I really like that. Like, if the smoothie is your one thing and you're talking to people about their one thing, it is a nice entry point to be promoting the smoothie group. But then you may want to think about, well, what else do you want to do within the smoothie group to expand the conversation to be not just about smoothies, but also to be about the one thing, or the podcast, and continuing the conversations that are started in the podcast. It's definitely worth thinking about, but I think that can work.
Cool. Yeah, it's got me thinking, even just talking to you about it now. I think I needed to say it out loud to someone to kind of work through it in my head. But yeah, so I think that's a good idea. I'm going to keep working on that, keep talking about that.
Yeah, nice. And I think having a Facebook group is a really great next step from the podcast to kind of get people that are really engaged in the podcast to come and continue the conversation. So I think it's a natural place to go next. What are you thinking in terms of, like, you've got interviews locked in, you've got your process down. What is next for you? Are you starting to think about a launch date, or are there any other challenges on the path at the moment?
Thankfully, my lovely husband has all the tech audio side kind of figured out. He's been playing with Audacity all week, which is amazing.
Good man, good man.
And actually, I know, and he's actually said that it's fun, and I'm like, oh God, go for it then, because that is not my idea of fun. So he's kind of all over that. Look, my most nerve-wracking thing, or my biggest challenge seems to be with the intros and outros and knowing when to record them and whether to batch them up to save me time or whether to record them straight after so I remember exactly what I've talked to people about. So I think that's my biggest struggle at the moment, just working out when to do that. Can you remind me, like, what do you do? What advice would you give around that?
Yeah, good one. And I know this, we actually were talking about this one in a Facebook group the other day. And interestingly, the two of us that answered did things quite differently. So it's worth talking about. And look, I mean, my process is to do my intros and outros right before I send my episode off to my producer to edit it and send it live, basically. So the reason I do that is, it probably began because I didn't have the workflow in place to do it in a more timely manner. But then what I've worked out is I actually like doing it that way because it gives me the opportunity to be talking at a very timely moment about if I've got something that I want to be promoting, then I can do that because I don't always know exactly what I'll be promoting a few months out, but I'm often recording a few months out. So that's been very much the process for me. But then when I've started a second podcast that I've started with Elle Roberts, Lady Boss Chats, what we decided to do, because we wanted to really make it an efficient work process, because it was, it's a collaboration that we're doing for fun, and we can see that it may go somewhere, but we didn't want to add too much workload. So what we did was we recorded a standard intro, a standard outro, and then all we do is we get online, we record the episode, and our producer puts the intro and outro on the end of it. So that was pretty much a very time efficient way of doing it. And then, other ways to do it. And I've been a guest on podcasts where we've got onto Skype and they've told me, I'm going to do my intro. So you just be quiet for a bit and then I'll bring you in, basically. And so they'll do the intro live. So they don't, it's only if you want your intro to be reflecting upon or introducing the episode that's coming from the perspective of someone that knows what's coming, or if you're comfortable with actually just going, we're here to talk about this and roll. It's really just up to you on the format. I like having an individual intro for each episode because I like playing with what I do in that intro. Sometimes I'll have different promotions that I talk about. Sometimes I try and tell a story that sheds a little bit of light on my life behind the scenes or my business or something that I've done in business lately or something that I've learned, because I enjoy that in other people's podcasts because it helps me get to know the host a little more. But it's really personal choice.
Oh, well, now you've just given me way too many options. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think I agree with you. I like I do like the kind of timely intros. And I guess it's funny, I've said this with every single thing so far, but I think I'm probably just going to need to play with it and see what works, what's most efficient, in my kind of work time. And how far in advance I'm going to be interviewing people and kind of the order that I'll be releasing them in, and all those sorts of things are kind of yet to be uncovered. So, I just got to do what works best for me right now, and then if I need to change it, I need to change it.
Absolutely, you can totally change it up. And the way that I do my intros and outros has changed lots over the time that I've been podcasting, because it's a place where you can experiment and do different things and see what works. So definitely just play with it. Pick something, go with it, and then see how it goes.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Yeah. So that would have been my biggest struggle, I think, so far. I've decided, I think, oh God, this is a bit scary, but I'm pretty sure I've decided to do it weekly.
Ooh.
I know, I know. um, yeah, I'm. I think because I base that solely on what I enjoy in other people's podcasts, and I'm a massive consumer of podcasts, so I do get antsy. Like if people haven't released in their week when they usually do that, or I'm almost hanging out for the next one to come that next week. So
Yeah.
I'm just going by that, and at the moment, I hope and I think my kind of hours allow that, and especially with my husband doing the tech, it's kind of all just done at home. So it's not like I have to have things prepared to send off to someone else. It's like he's kind of right there doing it for me. So
Beautiful.
yes, we will see.
Look, I think if you can do it weekly, brilliant, do it. So what are you thinking then in terms of how many you'd like to have done before you go live, just to give yourself a bit of a buffer?
Yes, so I'd like to release, I'd like to launch with 3 or 4 and then maybe have 3 or 4 up my sleeve as well. I guess I had a question around this. So I know are both of yours fortnightly?
Yes, so currently
Okay,
I am podcasting weekly, but I'm doing it
right, but
across
on
2
channel.
different podcasts. Yes.
Okay. So your one with Elle Roberts is a little bit different, but for the wellness entrepreneur, how many interviews do you actually do a week? Like, I'm just wondering whether I need to hold myself kind of accountable to go, right, I want to record 2 interviews every week so that I can kind of have a lot up my sleeve. What do you do with that? Do you have a set
Oh,
amount each week?
look, I don't. I'm very much, I just go with when I have time, when I kind of come across people I want to interview. I use Satori for my booking calendar at the moment, and I basically have a podcast interview session set up in there. So anytime that I discover someone that I want to interview, I've easily got this link that I can just send them. So what that means, because I've been doing quite a bit of that lately, I reckon I've got 3 episodes already done that, so I'm about 6 weeks ahead of schedule. Plus, I have about 6 more interviews scheduled over the coming month. So
Okay.
I'm well ahead, but there have been
Mm.
times when I'm not. But if I was on a weekly pod process, then I'd probably have to get more specific about that, because weeks just seem to pass faster than fortnights.
Yes.
I know
Yes. That's what I'm
scientifically that doesn't
thinking.
make sense, but that's how it feels. So if I were you, and if you're going to launch with 4 in the can, or 4, a buffer of 4, then I would be trying to keep that buffer of 4. So to do that,
Yes.
you've got 4 episodes a month on average that you need to
Yes.
create, but to keep 4 in the can, then you really need to be doing 8 a month. So
Yes.
yes, that's like approximately 2 a week. But then if you aimed for 2 a week, but then you missed, 1 week you ended up only doing 1, at least well, that's why I have the buffer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And if you were
Okay. Cool.
going
That's
on
helpful.
holidays for 2 weeks, then you might try and do an extra couple in the weeks preceding, or you go,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to use up the buffer and then I'll record more when I get back.
Yes. Yes.
How does that
And I
fit?
have a question. Yeah, that sounds really good. And I have a question for you about asking other people to be on your podcast.
Hmm.
I know you've had a podcast for a while now, so you're far more advanced. But I guess my question is, do you more often reach out to people and say, you're like, this is what I'm doing, you inspire me, blah, 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 I would like you to be on my podcast? Or do you kind of open it up to people and say, if you would like to be on my podcast? Like, what, I'm just wondering, what's your percentage of having to kind of hustle for people, or people pitching you ideas to be on your podcast?
Look, at the moment, I get a lot of pitches.
Mm.
And part of that is just because, I've been around for a while. I've kind of got a steady position in the charts. It's not high, but it's in the first 100 that iTunes show in the business results. So I'm always able to be found if someone's just scrolling through. I seem to be getting a lot more pitches from people's management. So when a brand or a person hires an agency to get them more promotion, then I'm getting pitched by them as well. But in the early days, I was doing all of that. I was the one that was reaching out to people. And what my usual approach was to find their email address, write an email with the subject line, an interview request, because nobody is not going to open an email that has an interview request as the subject line.
That's genius.
Like, it's just not going to happen. So even then, at least they're going to read it, even if they say no at the end of the day. But then I would be specifically saying, in the days before the podcast had launched, I'd be talking about the podcast I was creating. You really only have to get your first interview, and then you can start, then you've got the social proof of who else you've interviewed, even if you're not live yet. So my first interview was with the Merrymaker sisters, who I'd been following online for a while. I just knew that they were the type of, lovely, open personalities that would be most likely to say yes, and they did. And, all I really had to show at that point was a little bit of a social media following, a website that actually was for the business I used to have. And then from then on, when I was pitching and I didn't yet have the podcast launched, I could say, I've interviewed the Merrymaker sisters. I'm going to be interviewing X, Y, and Z because they're scheduled in, and I'd love to interview you. And then once the podcast is launched, you can say, I've interviewed X, Y, and Z. You can check out the podcast here, all of those things. But, that's just the social proof side. And often you don't even need that. I think if you're going for really big names, like for me, when I've gone after Amy Porterfield, who I've had a commitment that will do an episode with me, but we haven't done it yet. I was dealing with her VAs. I wasn't dealing directly with her because she's got a lot of staff and a massive business. So they were asking questions like, who is your audience? What sort of numbers do you have? And I think once you get to the point where you're pitching that type of person, you're going to get those questions, but you don't start with that type of person. I believe anyway, if you want to get more yeses than nos. But then, I've had names that I feel like were relatively big in my first 6 months or whatever. So I think it's just all about what inspires you, who you're inspired to ask, and being really comfortable and unattached to their response. But another way that I've done it, and this is often a really good way to get a bigger name, is to tweet them. So using social media to build a bit of, it could be Instagram, it could be Facebook, whatever. But I've found that Twitter and Instagram are probably my main two where I'll do this, is if I'm following them and I'm commenting on their stuff, my name is already in their mind. And then I can drop in would you be interested in being interviewed on my podcast? And undoubtedly they say yes. The harder thing to do from that point is to kind of chase them and nail them down, because sometimes it's like, sure, I will. And then you're like, okay, what's your email? And they're like, they're not going to tweet you their email address. So, but it's a good way to just build those online relationships with people, so that when you do follow up with I'd love to interview you, they already know who you are. You've shared their stuff. You've demonstrated a bit of social media now. So I think that works really well.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, Anna, we will get back together in a couple of weeks and see where you're at and be hopefully talking about a launch plan.
Sounds good. I'm excited.
Thanks so
Beautiful.
much
Thank
for
you.
sharing the journey.
No worries. Thanks, Katie. Bye.
Are you a podcaster who has been podcasting for a few months? You're over the tech hurdle, you've cleared the starting hurdle, and now you're kind of wondering, what next? How do I ensure my podcast craft is developing? How do I connect more with my audience and create a community around my brand? How do I connect with more influencers and develop lasting relationships with them? Well, my dear, Podcast Empire is the membership community for you. For $37 a month or $370 a year, you will get access to me and an intimate tribe of podcasting entrepreneurs. You'll get sharp strategy, laser-focused customer targeting, and epic brand building through the platform of your podcast. We do this through accountability with monthly goal setting, highly practical and tiny bite-sized trainings. We just looked at podcast rebrands and solo formats, and hot seat reviews of member podcasts. To see more and join, go to www.podcastempires.com. Join the empire. We covered a lot in this episode, didn't we? Interview craft, intros, outros, launching. So my tip for the newbie podcaster today is actually more of a mindset tip. Craft is something that develops and evolves the more that you practice your art. That is a fact. Write that down. Craft is something that evolves and develops the more that you practice your art. No one can be perfect in their first episode. No one, not even you, my perfectionist darling, not even you. The sooner that you accept that and make peace with done is better than perfect, the faster that you can get started and hit publish, letting go of the attachment. Or be attached. Don't let go, but not so attached that you can't publish. And my tip for the more experienced podcaster is, how do we learn, improve and evolve? Firstly, understanding where we're at, which is what you will have done after last week's episode, or if you didn't, assess how your podcast is going in terms of criteria like consistency, downloads, engagement, opt-ins, however you measure the success of your podcast. Then I want you to look at your business strategy. What is your business model? What types of clients do you want coming into your business via the top of your funnel? Because your podcast is the top of your funnel. I want you to ask yourself, is the podcast working to do that for you? Where are the gaps? How can you start to close those gaps? It might be that you just have an information gap, so you need to survey your listener audience. Or it might be that you have a craft gap, you want to get better as an interviewer. So are you listening back to your podcast and taking notes about things that you want to change? Or it might be that you just want, have variable popularity across each of your shows. So look at your most successful podcast episodes and dissect what made them different or successful, and then do more of that. So there's a few tips you can get started with to improve, learn and grow your craft and business. I will see you in part 4 of the summer series next week.
Hey, we've loved contributing to your empire building today. Please share us with a fellow empire builder so that we can help them too. Thank you to Luke at The Wellness Pro for production and editing, the Virtually Holistic Hub for show notes and admin support, to our guest, and to you, our most important listener. You should also check out my other podcast, Lady Boss Chats, where Elle Roberts and I chat all things Lady Boss life. You'll feel like you've just pulled up a cozy armchair with your biz bestie. Find us in your favourite podcast app or at theladybossproject.com.